Hello and welcome to the Techforce podcast show. I'm your host Shivani. We all know blockchain technology by now. Different industries are booming with blockchain opportunities. But how can an agrarian economy benefit from blockchains? Well, to talk about that, let's welcome our guest for today, Shadrack Kubyane. Hey Shadrack, welcome to the show.
Hi Shivani, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you? How have you been?
I'm excellent. I'm excellent. Thank you. Thank you for the hosting.
Shadrack, can you tell our listeners who are you, what do you do, and tell our listeners something about yourself?
Most certainly, most certainly. So I think first and foremost, I'm a villager at heart, meaning my early days here on earth, my early decade was lived purely in the village, in deep rural parts of South Africa, whereby I
Okay.
also got involved in the family businesses, further to farming and doing other things that village people do. I then segued into industry beyond finishing school, and I did end up in corporate where I became shaped as the corporate leader and also later on Pan-African leader that I am today. My last corporate role was with Deloitte. And last but not least, through management consulting, after leaving Deloitte, I then segued after a decade in management consulting practice. I segued into blockchain, and that's why now I'm the co-founder of Coronet Blockchain that is repairing the continent of Africa's supply chains today. Thank you kindly.
Oh, that is wonderful. As you talked about blockchain and you talked about farming as well. So that got me to thinking that our topic for today is like I'm introducing the topics blockchain and agriculture. So, like
Yes.
how these two can benefit from each other, how a blockchain can benefit the agricultural industry. We'll be going to discuss that today.
That's a very good question, and thanks once again for the topic. And if I hadn't said it before, greetings to the listeners, greetings to the audiences. It's great for me to be here. Thank you so much. So, with that being said, I think to understand the intersection between blockchain and agriculture, the glue that holds these two together, or the conduit that links these two sectors together, is actually supply chains. So you would do better to really revisit your understanding of supply chain as an audience, as a listener, to now better sit up and take notes on how blockchain is either disrupting or enhancing and bringing efficiencies into agriculture. Let me be practical for a moment with your listeners. Let me be quite practical. First and foremost, take milk. Take a pint of milk, not even a liter. Take a pint of milk, or if you are in certain parts of the world, India or other parts of the continent of Africa, take a liter of milk if you may. That liter of milk did not just emerge out of nowhere and show up in either your plastic bottle or inside your glass bottle, depending, or even some of them, it's a box cotton, meaning cardboard. It didn't just materialize in that. Let's follow its supply chain journey to how it ended up in your cupboards, or how the milkman left it on your doorstep, or how you picked it up from the retail shelves down the road, or how it ended up in your fridge. First and foremost, there has to be those that are growing cattle. And those are either cattle growers, or depending on the country you are in, they'll be referred to as cattle farmers. So whatever farming activities are around the nourishment of cattle and looking after cattle, that's where what we call the departure point, or the point of origin in the milk supply chain. And where blockchain particularly becomes interested is what type of inputs went into feeding that cattle, nurturing that cattle, because the inputs, such as your immunization, such as the medication that the cattle is on to prevent diseases like foot and mouth disease that sometimes affects cattle. So we need to know not only that the cattle was healthy, but the type of things you used as a grower to keep that cattle alive and keep it healthy. We're actually following due process. We also want to know as consumers, not even as a blockchain expert, As a consumer, I want to know the conditions under which that cattle grew. I mean, I'm sure in India and in parts of Africa and the West, there is things like, no, you know what? This cattle was free range cattle. Those are some of the claims that are made to say, listen, this milk is a free range milk. Wait a minute. If it's free range milk, can you show me the parameters and the length of the farm where the cattle grew? So blockchain as a record keeping ledger captures such details at the raw material origin. That's one. And number two, of course, moving from raw material origin into production, that step is triggered by the milking of the cattle. The minute the cattle is milked, I also don't know that it was not a lot of cattle treated in an inhumane way or just bundled together and they fed anything. But I also don't know that they were not harmed during the feeding, the milking process. Best practices in milking were used. Now we go into the production. Now I leave the cattle behind as a consumer. I'm following the cattle behind. Blockchain expert will come later, but the consumer is following this cattle, this milk liter to go like, oh, so you milked it. Now, how are you processing it? Are you adding certain preservatives, additives, or even flavorants for milk that is actually mixed up with flavor? Are there any processes in there that shouldn't be part of such procedure? So your production, your processing, including your packaging. Is your packaging harmful to us? Because the milk will now spend a considerable amount of time before I consume it. So I want to know on that production phase. What about distribution? The minute it leaves a production plant, whether the plant is on the farm or the plant is actually further down the value chain and it's outsourced to other people, when it leaves the processing plant and makes its way into the distribution channel, I want to know the conditions under which that milk actually was in transit. Was it refrigerated? Was it actually preserved in such a way that it needed to be preserved? If it needed to be transported at X amount temperature, was that temperature followed or was it ignored? So I need to know all this data and who was transporting it. Was it a licensed transporter? Are they actually a tax-paying transporter? I need to know such things. And is it a transporter or a processor or a grower that are indulging or engaging in human rights violations? Are they engaging in slave labor and all those things? Or even child labor or human rights violations? I need this data before I consume that pint of milk. And I also need to, when I find it on the retail shelf, whatever details are on the packaging, they must actually be what is inside the packaging. You mustn't tell me that this milk is going to have a shelf life of 1 month. Meanwhile, your processes, the way you treated it, actually only leaves me with 1 week worth of shelf life. And now if it goes sour, you blame the consumer. You go like, it must be your fridge. It must be how long you took between the store and your home. No. It's actually your processes. So I need that data as a consumer. Last but not least, at the point of sale, when it exits, whatever pricing point it was supposed to be sold for, as recommended by the processor or producer, I needed to exit that shop at that price, because sometimes maybe you've seen it on other drinks, maybe PepsiCo drink or whatever other brands that I won't mention. You find that it says the recommended retail price is this amount, but sometimes the retailers don't honor that amount. So I need to know those things as a consumer. And last but not least, I need to know what I'm consuming. So where does blockchain come in? All this data that I shared with your listeners right now and I shared with you, it is always captured. Always. It's captured by hand. It's always captured by Excel spreadsheets. It's always captured by computers and software as a service. Where the gap was, or where the problem, or where the irritation was in the market, is that these spreadsheets, these handwritten notes, and other software as a service can be manipulated. If later on there's a milk scare, or maybe there's a milk, recall, people can go like, no, we transported it at X temperature, not Y temperature. So we need blockchain, because blockchain is such that the supply chain is protected from data being manipulated, because it's immutable. I'll touch on that later. And as a distributed ledger, it also ensures that from the smallest player to the most largest commercial size player, they can be on the same page. They can sing from the same hymn book. That's how blockchain intersects with agriculture at that intersection node called supply chain. It's not a, what do you call it? It's a decentralized ledger. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Centralized. The grower is keeping records, but he or she may not share that records with the milking team. And the milking team may not share their records with the processing team. And the processing team may not pass on their records to the transporting team or the retailer. So that is a centralized ledger mechanism or centralizing records. And it's bad for business because us as consumers, we end up with blind spots without knowing certain things that the milk in this case went through, or the potatoes, or even the meat for those that are meat eaters out there that enjoy meat. So we have certain blind spots. So distributed ledger or decentralized ledger simply means that this is one digital document that all the players across the supply chain, across the value chain, including government and receiver of revenue or tax collection, including regulators that are regulating the milk industry, all of them are on the same page. You know how sometimes in business people go like, I hope that we are on the same page at the end of this meeting. Well, blockchain is doing exactly that. It's putting all the participants of the milk value chain on the same page. That's why it's a distributed ledger and it's a decentralized ledger. That's one. Secondly, blockchain brings in the immutability of the record. That's why we call the blockchain ledger the immutable ledger or the immutable set of records. What that simply means is that data from the beginning origin of the milk supply chain in this case to the very last point where I take it out of my fridge to consume it or to cook with it or to bake with it. It means all those records are bulletproof protected. No one can wake up at night and go like, listen, I know we manipulated prices here, or we manipulated temperature data entries, or we manipulated this or that, or we manipulated how many people were working on our farm and under what conditions. Now let me just edit it and pull an eye over everyone's eyes. That's not possible with blockchain. With other parallel systems in supply chain solutions, it is. But blockchain brings that curtain, that iron veil to really, prevent records from even blockchain experts from actually manipulating them or any member of the supply chain. The next one is smart contracts. Perhaps your listeners, knowing that this is Techforce and they're quite clued up on things, maybe they are quite aware of this phrase called smart contracts. So smart contracts are very relevant to the milk value chain because a smart contract is not really a contract that is smart. I'm going to just put it in layman's term. A smart contract could have better been labeled automated contracts. Maybe that could have been a better label, because what that means is that when that liter of milk arrives and I taste it and I'm actually quite happy with its condition, temperature, and taste, I can actually now, I don't need to pay at the retailer point. I don't need to pay at the till. It's only when I'm happy with it as a consumer, or maybe I'm not a single-use end consumer. Maybe I'm actually a retailer who's buying truckloads of the milk. When I'm happy after my inspections, only then I advise the blockchain ledger to go like, I'm happy with my inventory. Then there will be automated payments across the value chain. The transporter will be paid, the processor will be paid, even the government will be paid their revenue automatically without waiting for month end or the end of the quarter or the end of the semester or the end of the year for your records to be consolidated. Then you pay tax. No. Tax is automated, and even money to the small farmer who no longer has to make a lot of noise to go like, why are you big players paying each other, but you want me to actually cry first before you pay me? Is it because I don't have lawyers? No. Smart contracts, they automate payments to everyone, upstream and downstream the value chain. Last but not least, traceability. Via QR code methods or other mechanisms, consumers or any member of the supply chain can now interact with that QR code, and the milk story or the milk journey will be revealed. If there was a point whereby refrigeration was switched off or refrigeration was broken, it didn't work, you will be told that story when you interact with that QR code. So you need to know it's a see-through supply chain. It's a see-through value chain. And last but not least, in case there's a milk outbreak and maybe milk has to be recalled during litigation and court processes, those players in the milk value chain can now change their minds and edit their records or make records to vanish. That's why the traceability, the transparency, and the trust of that supply chain is very important to all players involved.
Yeah, so like it can also help the market to expand, and that encourages healthy competition between the sellers or the lead
Yes.
competitors who are selling that particular milk or any particular product.
Absolutely, you are quite right on that on that note, and I'm more than ready to even expand further on the economic benefits of the supply chain by blockchain. But I will take your cue. You are quite right. You are quite right.
Yeah, so I was going for that only next. Like blockchain in supply chain can almost every industry right now. Do you think it has a potential for economic benefits, like especially for countries like India or Africa who are still at a developing stage?
Most certainly, emerging economies or developing economies. I believe that blockchain as a solution, looking for a problem, are really standing to benefit even more than emerged economy or established economies like the West or Europe or the US. And I'm going to tell you the reason why. I'm going to divide the reason into three parts.
Sure.
Firstly, I'll touch on the product compliance. Then I'll touch on the traceability of the records, why that's relevant to economic benefits. Last but not least, I'll also touch on something that actually exists in both our cultures across India and across most African countries. Is this thing called collaboration? Collaboration.
Yeah.
We are collaborative societies. It's in our culture. So blockchain
Yes.
as a collaborative tech tool, it's only arriving in an environment, in an economic environment that's already that's collaboration ready. So let me start with the product compliance. Why is product
Yeah.
compliance so important, and what economic benefits are there upstream and downstream and to the country itself? First and foremost, product compliance has been such that it has been a highly contested sector. I'm going to give you an example. If a farmer in South India or any part of India is farming really great produce, or a farmer in Africa, they may not be allowed to actually win the championships of the agricultural supply chains. Maybe your listeners are wondering, what are those championships? The championships of the agricultural supply chain is when even the smallest of smallholder farmers on a 1 hectare or 2 hectare can be allowed or permitted to actually bring their produce to the market, not just the market down the road, but to actually establish retailers or establish hotel chains or establish catering and eventing companies. Those are the championships. Those are the Oscars of the agricultural value chain. So what normally happens, due to barriers that are raised by quality assurance, let's call them excuses, let's not call them reasons. The big players normally go like, no, Shadrack, you're too much of a small farmer. Shivani, your farm is only 5 hectares, not 500 hectares. So you can't sell directly to the retailers. The retailers want big volumes. They want this. They also want for you to bring your produce with a quality assurance certificate that if you're to pay for it, you find that its costs are very prohibitive. So blockchain actually democratizes quality assurance, because if the records are captured of that milk from its grower stage right up until its final packaging and it's on the shelf, then there is no need for us as farmers to indulge or engage in this highly cost prohibitive and highly expensive quality assurance exercises that are actually needed. What do you call it? The quality assurance have to send an inspector to your farm at random places. You're paying for that inspector. The quality assurance companies have to send an inspector on the day of the harvest. It doesn't mean that a blockchain does not have inspections in place. There are inspections, but because it's a collaborative solution, That inspector is not going to be sent only to your farm, or that team of inspectors are going to be synchronized like a symphony, so that they do things not for one enterprise, but for actually mini enterprises that are family run and family owned businesses. So product compliance has been a reason why many are financially excluded, and many are excluded from accessing the markets in emerging economies. So that's the first thing, whereby blockchain is a game changer in terms of lowering the barriers for the smallest of farmers to the biggest to actually work in an efficient environment where there are no barriers to entry. That's number one. When it comes to traceable records and economic benefits for one farmer, for one farming area, and cumulatively it now benefits the country, because this type of inputs have got a cumulative effect. When it comes to business records, sometimes the big players, the commercial players, are quick to say, no, there is wrongdoing on the small farms. But it turns out that there's actually wrongdoings on the large scale commercial farmers as well. They are just better at hiding it. The small farmer has not gotten creative. So the benefit to the consumer, the benefit to the country, is when everything can be done transparently. So where records are traceable, records are available, and records can never be deleted. So that's really a cumulative benefit between the farming, processing, and the retailers, where we really create that see-through effect. And last but not least, when it comes to international trade or even regional trade, even the small farmers can use those same records to now be included and considered for banking instruments or for banking products, where in the past they were turned away because they were told, listen, you're farming very well, but your records are all over the place. So we can't even give you trade finance. We can't give you a loan. So therefore, you are, according to sustainable development goals, you're financially excluded. So in terms of the records component, blockchain tends to really referee those dynamics. Last but not least, collaboration. Sometimes for us to collaborate on a bigger scale as a country, or on a bigger scale as a community, we need collaborative tools. Think about ride sharing. Ride-sharing apps are all over the globe now. I may not mention the specific ones, but ride-sharing instills that sense of community. Meaning, if I want to take a tuk-tuk, maybe Shivani wants to take a tuk-tuk. My family and her family, we can join a tuk-tuk, or we can even join a bus if we are a bigger family going to a wedding. Now, those ride-sharing apps, they make it easy. So it's part of what's called the sharing economy. So blockchain accelerates the sharing economy in such a way that sharing of resources such as quality assurance, such as record keeping, is now made easier. And I'm going to make just one or two examples in terms of where in Africa particularly, a blockchain could have been a game changer if used even by large enterprises. In Kenya right now, KFC, which has been in Kenya, the chicken restaurant from America in Kenya, it has actually run out of potatoes. But lately they have raised the white flag to say they are out of potatoes. So if we go over the counter, we will get the chicken, but not the chips that go with the chicken. And it is bizarre what happened there, because they said the reason why the country of Kenya is not running out of potatoes, they're just running out of potatoes. The reason is because there's a lot of smallholder farmers that are farming potatoes, but their potatoes are not welcome into the KFC value chain because they cannot afford the enterprise fees that it takes to actually vet or actually quality assure their produce. So that's where blockchain is overdue to be deployed into those. And maybe your listeners are aware of PepsiCo, which is the competitor of Coca-Cola, both from America. PepsiCo actually failed dismally on the continent of Africa when they attempted to set up shop here, I think about 2 decades ago, maybe 3 decades. And the reason why they failed is not because their drink did not taste nice. It tasted actually very nice, if not as equally nice as the normal Coca-Cola. But the problem is they did not lock down the supply chain. What that means is they were running out of sources or what do you call it, or sources of origin for their material, whether for the drink or even for even for the other products, chocolates and chips, for the edibles, they were running out of farms where to source these materials. So you can say for PepsiCo in Africa, blockchain is 30 years late. They wish blockchain was here 30 years ago because they would have vetted a lot of farmers at scale, at high volumes, and they were going to lock down their supply chain. They wouldn't have failed. So those are some of the examples that come to mind. Last but not least, we had a client who was sourcing bamboo, what do you call it, bamboo wood from China, because their bamboo is among the best in the world. But the problem was he was getting quality inconsistencies. One season, the bamboo will be great quality, and maybe the next quarter the bamboo is poor quality. They only did that to him and his design business because he didn't have a see-through look into the supply chain. They were doing things really in his blind spot. So once blockchain is deployed into that agriculture, then bamboo, then processing of the bamboo plant, then it ends up in his design studio. Then he makes the most gorgeous salad bowls that are made out of wood, and also cutting boards that end up in the kitchen. They are like gourmet cutting boards. So he can't cause customers to pay gourmet prices. Meanwhile, the thing starts falling apart as a cutting board when it interacts with water. So those are some of the quality assurance and quality consistency issues, and also quality at scale that blockchain as a solution, looking for a problem in the emerging markets, is a perfect fit for moving the economies forward.
That's quite a good example you have put it through. For example, what are basic agricultural activities like when a farmer is checking the soil's temperature, the plowing the seeds and fertilizers, buying and selling of fertilizers? You can help it over there, but how a technology like blockchain can help farmers, like small farmers who are not yet aware of how a decentralized system can help them to rank their product or their whatever goods higher in the market. So, like, what would you say that we can approach to those small farmers, regional farmers who are like not quite aware about how blockchain is changing the industry?
That's a very good question. Ultimately, the layman or the everyday farmer or man or woman doesn't actually need to understand the intricacies or the technical details of how the blockchain works. They just have to understand their part of the chain and their part of responsibility in terms of ensuring that at every at every touch point there's input data that is collected according to the protocols that are put in place when the plants are, or rather when the crops are watered, when the crops are cultivated, what type of input fertilizers goes into the crops. All those, it's a must for them to be following a very, very simplified what do you call it, quality assuring protocols that are actually data collecting. Some of them will actually be inputted on the farm itself through certain hardware technologies, and others will be quite simple through phone devices that may be smartphones, may not be smartphones. So those type of quality checks, it will depend on how blockchain is being deployed into that region. It will also depend on the level of literacy, because some commercial sized farmers are quite literate. They've got farming managers that have got MBA and have got all these specialized programs.
Yeah.
And then others that have been farming for generations, but they actually use the most simplest phones and they use the most simplest farming methods. So whatever blockchain solution is being iterated in whatever part of either the country or the community has to be sensitive to the language, to the culture, to the climate, including to the already existing practices and farming methods. So there can be a no cut and paste blockchain solution. What worked in Ethiopia will work in India. What worked in Kenya will work maybe in Netherlands. No, there can be no cut and paste. Each deployment must be sensitive through design thinking and other collaborative methods to really, really tailor it to the realities on the ground, so that the trustworthiness of the data that is collected can be trusted through the trustworthy mechanisms of that data, which are sensitive to those that are actually existing in that collaboration between man and machine to give us the produce that we can eat and sleep better at night.
Right, right. I agree. Like, we are like currently at step one. Like, we are really early in the stage, specifically for blockchain in agriculture. Okay, Shadrack, we all have heard about metaverse, right?
Yes.
It's here. It's already here. Okay, and people are buying lands in metaverse. Real estate is really expensive in metaverse. And what do you have to say about that? Like how things are changing so fast in blockchain industry. What are your views on that?
Talking about the metaverse and land being exorbitantly priced and expensive, it's really quite normal. It's quite normal for that to happen. It may not be fair, it may not be right, but it's quite normal because what do you call it? The metaverse. If you're to look at the metaverse next to blockchain as a technology, the metaverse has inverted the affordability pyramid, meaning while Bitcoin as a technology within blockchain, which was in cryptocurrencies or finance, started being quite cheap. I mean, like 1 cent and things like that. And now it's actually last year we saw Bitcoin pass what 60,000 US dollars and more. So the metaverse being expensive, it mainly has to do with the input technologies that are going into making the metaverse work. And I'm going to take a few steps back for the benefit of the audiences, the listeners right now. Remember when the LCD TV screens first began being rolled out in the world? That was not the metaverse. That was just a flat screen TV for our households or for businesses. They were quite expensive compared to what they are now. That's number one. Number two,
Yeah.
remember smartphones now originally entered what do you call it, the market. You couldn't find a smartphone that was less than 1,000 US dollars. But today, you can even pick up a smartphone for $100. You can pick up a smartphone for sometimes even less than $100. There are certain countries that are rolling out smartphones that can use WhatsApp and other messaging app, and also use search engines that are actually, some of them even less than $50. People are really pushing the envelope because the technology has matured. So even with the metaverse, while it may not be fair for land or real estate in the metaverse to be priced so ridiculously, it's sometimes a bit understandable when it comes to the maturity of the metaverse sector, which is still in its infancy. And there's a lot of things that people have to figure out. And to be honest with you, sometimes there could be corporate greed, whereby people just want to make their quick buck and just bail out. If that is the case, then reality is going to humble those players in the metaverse, because any business has to obey the laws of supply and demand. So if you price your offering so high and out of the reach of the bigger masses, then they will walk away from you. And if they walk away from you, you will be humbled. You'll be forced to eat a humble pie, and you'll have to come back and go like, well, I was joking, guys. Can I lower the pricing barriers for you a little bit? So yes, we are all on the edge of our seat. We want to see how the metaverse trajectory is going to pan out. It will be an interesting one, following the LCD screen, following the smartphone, and following other technologies, which we have seen them really drop very drastically as adoption or industry maturity increases.
Let's take a step back. Like, I would like to ask you one last question about agriculture. Like, how can a blockchain curb the agrarian country's economy? Okay, so like you explained a little bit of this.
Yes, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. Firstly, any agrarian dependent country, has to be mindful that there are two players on the agricultural equation. There are players on the informal sector side of things, and then there are players on the formal economy side of things. And so we really have to be mindful in terms of how these players are, because no economy in the world, I repeat, no economy or even agrarian dependent society in the world can actually make it if a larger population of their of their business environment remains trapped in the informal economy. So blockchain in that regard helps to accelerate compliance, helps to accelerate the running of supply chain, the quality assurance, the financial inclusion, the bankability of businesses, even those that are in the informal sector, without forcing them to formalize. It actually avails a much more affordable, a much more simplified formalization tool. So agrarian societies, think about China. China in the 70s is where what do you call it, is where this agrarian dependency was. 80% of China's economy in the 70s, or even before that, was agricultural dependent, but a lot of it was quite manual. There hasn't been technologies, not like blockchain, but technologies that bring about efficiencies, like technology, simple hardware equipment like the tractor and other processing machinery. Since then, China has taken a leap, leveraging every physical technology and software technology possible in order to ensure that most of their food security is brought about in the formal economy, and there's lesser manual labor or hand. There's more and more, what do you call it, machine aided or tech or other technologies doing the joint heavy lifting. So any agrarian society out there, whether it's governments listening right now, whether it's regulators, there has to be a policy push towards formalizing the economy, because economies that are not formalized are always going to be denied a seat at the economic dinner table. Number one, agrarian societies that are not formalized are always, without fail, going to face ongoing daily chaos, such that their food insecurity always increases, meaning even when they are farming, there will be major losses between the harvest point and the shelf, the retail shelf, because technology with blockchain, with AI and other hardware type technologies, they help to really close the gaps where there's wastage. And wastage is a real deal. I think between India and Africa, there's still those countries, or rather, there's still those regions that suffer up to 50% of food wastage from the time it is harvested by the farmer at crop produce and to the time that it ends up on our dinner table. To be losing 50% of what you're producing when technology is on standby, willing to formalize and plug whatever leaks or holes, is something that we should look at. And digitizing trade, if you look at Sustainable Development Goals 2030, a lot of those 17 goals, they discuss ensuring financial inclusion and inclusion of women, inclusion of youth, inclusion of communities and collaborative partnerships. Most of those are a clear manual where blockchain must step in to really lower barriers and to really be the oil the wheels of the collaborative journey. And of course, improving production efficiencies, it's something that any agrarian society should look at. Don't just count your farmer head counts. Maybe I'm just going to make a very, very feasible example. Don't just say, I've got 1 million farmers or I've got 10 million farmers. The question is, are you improving their outputs? Blockchain may not physically improve the output or the crop produce, but it will keep dependable records for you to see exactly where the leaks are across your supply chain in a certain node or certain neighborhood, and collectively across the agrarian dependent country.
It's really a wonderful way to put it.
Thank you, kind.
Okay. Yeah. So on the ending note, like, what advice do you have to give our audience, especially the young audience who are wondering, like, what this NFT market has, and should they always jump into the trend, or do them like what I always say at the end of my podcast, like, whatever you do in this NFT world, do your own research. Okay. So without any research, don't jump into any trends. So what's your advice on this?
You know what? I totally agree with what you said about doing your homework or doing your research. I would like to even add something that India and African countries, they share that in common. We are always, in our cultures, we are always encouraged to listen to the elders. So you may be wondering, but who are the elders in NFTs? Well, let me ask you to consider as the audience. If billionaires, they do their homework first before investing, whether in blockchain, whether in NFTs, or in any sector whatsoever, why should you and I not do our homework? We must
Right.
investment, you must do what's called your due diligence. Obviously, the level of homework that you have to do will be dependent on the transaction at hand, meaning you will do maybe a 1 hour homework if you want to play around in the NFT space with $100. But the minute that money goes up significantly, you need to spend a lot longer than an hour, and you need to spend a lot more beyond a desktop research. Contact a blockchain expert, contact an industry expert, and if need be, you need to observe how others are playing in that space, whether they are billionaires or millionaires. You may not be one yourself as an audience, but you need to always listen to the elders. The elders are millionaires, they are billionaires. How the elders behave, we need to listen to them. Even from far, we need to observe them. So we must remember our culture. It might be an exciting new NFT or cryptocurrency sector, but there's the good old rules still apply. Do your homework, do your due diligence.
Right, I totally agree with that. Like, always have a contact, always build your own network, reach out to people who are into this space and ask what they are doing, ask what you can
Absolutely.
do, and then go ahead with the thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, okay. So, on the ending note, what we do at the Techforce podcast show is we ask for the guests to close it. So, like any kind of a quotes or any kind of a movie quote or any personal thing you believe in that you would like to share with our audience.
You know, that's a good one. And I'm going to give a bit of a background before I give the code. Often,
Right.
here's the background, the code will follow. And thanks for that opportunity. The background is sometimes when you talk about things like blockchain, when you talk about things like agricultural sector, agrarian economies, economic benefits, macro value chains, they can seem a bit overwhelming for those that are in farming. And just for the benefit of your listeners, although we are talking about agriculture today, there's blockchain in fashion, there's blockchain in beauty, there's blockchain in cosmetics. So blockchain exists in whatever part of your neighborhood or industry you are in. These things can seem a bit overwhelming, or even without blockchain, even entering the startup and hoping to maybe grow into a unicorn one day that is worth more than $1 billion, it can seem overwhelming. Here is where my code comes in. Now that you've got a background, dear audiences,
Yeah.
my code is simple. Start where you are. Do what you can do and use what you have within your reach. Once you start that, rinse and repeat, be consistent. That is how even the biggest of billionaires started. They started where they were. There is a billionaire who actually who founded Chick-fil-A in America, which is the other chicken restaurant that is next to KFC. He didn't start in making chicken sandwiches, and later his company is bringing billions, sometimes more billions per square meter than KFC. He didn't start there. He started by selling Coca-Cola drink, one Coca-Cola drink. He'll run to the store and then sell it at maybe I think at some point he was even making 40 cents increase on the Coca-Cola he's selling. He was cutting costs and making sure he doesn't buy ice from the iceman. This was like long time ago, like 50, 60 years ago. We didn't have fridges, so he had to buy ice from the iceman. He was counting all these things because he started where he was. He was a boy of 8 who learned how to sell Coca-Cola bottles that he buys from the shop and bring convenience to those that are living in his neighborhood. Each bottle that he didn't break, he made a good profit on it. Even though that profit was counted in cents, he started where he was faithful with the cents, and later he became a billionaire. So let's start with what we have. Let's start with who we have. Maybe for you, you're not selling Coca-Cola. Start with your skill. Whatever your skill can do, use it and be faithful with that. Thank you kindly.
Wow, that was quite motivational. Like, really, really amazing.
Thank you kindly. I'm really glad to do my bit in making these inputs that I've seen work in my life.
Right, right. Okay, it was really wonderful to have you on the show. And thank you so much for sharing this outstanding knowledge about blockchain. Just at the stepping stone, like we're just in the first step of this, the new thing that is going to happen. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on it, and thank you, Shadrack, for coming on the show.
It is such a delight, and let me thank you for making time and for your hospitality. Let me also, on a parting note, remind the listeners that given that this is the Techforce podcast, we mustn't forget that Techforce is a reminder that we are a stronger force together, with or without the technology. So let's stick together and become
Right.
an unstoppable force together. Thank you kindly. Thank you for your time and listening this far. To be continued. Thank you so much.
Th- Thank you so much, Shadrack. Thanks for your kind words.
Have a good one. Thank you so much.